Oh yeah, for sure. Because I mean, one thing I want to ask about with it, because like I only kind of picked up on this when I was reading it again. There are one or two things in this book I say that haven't aged particularly well. If you think kind of what
Sure.
I'm going to talk about, so obviously you got to think of the context in this written. I don't think Foley's homophobic in any way, but they're like that chapter where, especially he's talking about. So one of the first places he goes to abroad is Africa, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, because he goes there for some tours. And a common thing in certain parts of Africa is like if you're friends with a man, they will walk around holding hands in certain parts of the culture, and that like freaked him out a little bit. But then he does write how he felt a bit like bad that he like because this guy he made friends with who's from there just did it to him randomly one day, and he had to explain how that looks in the States. And he did say he felt a little bit bad about that because he said, "Oh well, I'm in this other culture. This guy clearly respected me and thought of me as his friend. I should have just went along with it." But then there's the other part of the book where it's him, Steve Austin, and William Regal on a gay beach in I think California, somewhere around there. Yeah, and the way he writes about that, you kind of read it going, okay, it doesn't read particularly well now these days. But I think that's just because of the time when it was written. I don't think he's inherently homophobic.
I think all media you have to take in the time it's written.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, we can take this book as a microcosm and then pluck it out and read it in the year of 2022. But then you just kind of have to look at everything around that point. I mean, hell, just look at Raw or look at whatever was on at the time. It was all had much worse things, really. But then all media did at the time.
I mean, I hope we get to it because it's a good book as well. But I'm pretty sure I've read this story countless times in different books. I think I've read it in William Regal's, and there's a bit some choice language in that as well. They look back on it and think, okay, not great. I think he calls them shirt lifters.
Sure, but it's I mean, it was just the accepted thing at the time. Sometimes, But even so, I think you still look at it as art versus artist, and I think most of these artists have been very vocal supporters and proponents of
Foley. I'm in no way sitting here.
But there are definitely parts where you just have to put on a. This was written in this time, so.
I mean, especially with the whole a common thread that's through this book, which I guess a lot of more modern people might be lost on, is this book was also used to further his friendly banter rivalry with Al Snow. So there's a lot of thing. He does explain it in the book where basically him and Al have this kind of backstage thing with them being friends, but they're always trying to get digs and jabs at each other. And Foley being the ever comedian and uses his first ever written book to get a lot of those jabs at Al Snow, and a lot of them are like very sort of gay kind of humor. They are funny, yeah.
They are. There is a lot of humor in this book, and a lot of it just comes from his honesty and just things that have happened. It isn't honestly not necessarily any jokes that he tells. It's straight up, just holy shit, that's ridiculous that happened. Or even some of it's tragically funny. In some respects, like we talked about the nurse throwing the ear away very callously, where he was just like he's just always thinking like, yeah, can definitely sew it back on. He feels for the ear and it's not there, and he's like, yeah, it can be sewed back on. It's fine.
I think because I think a good reason why I want to pick this one is because this was the book that really, it wasn't like there hadn't been books about wrestling before, but biographies, I think especially, there hadn't been a lot of, mainly because you got to think at the time this release, kayfabe was still a thing. It was starting to waver a little bit, but it was still kind of a thing. Like you didn't have it. This was sort of the first major autobiography to come along, and then from there on, it's kind of opened the gates, and every wrestler kind of does one now, which is great. I love reading them. But I think one thing that was interesting is that he was nearly never supposed to write this book. Actually, I think he talks about it in the follow-up. He was given a ghostwriter originally, and it was through meeting the ghostwriter that he realized no one's going to be able to capture what I have to say accurately, no matter how much I tell them, which is why he decided to do it. And the publishing took a risk on it because they were a bit hesitant. And it wasn't until he turned in the first few pages that they went, okay, no, you can definitely write this. We'll let you do it. And he wrote the book through injury. He had surgery on his knee, and he was like, I don't want any painkillers because I've got to sit up in bed and I need to write some chapters. So he wrote it through typical Foley hard grit as well.
Well, that's interesting because, you know, he starts the book basically saying that he was always writing, and he is, you know, always told that he should be a writer. So I'm glad that spark got reignited, and it did come from his mouth, because you can tell it's you read it. You're like me, you read it in their voice when you do it.
Oh yeah. I think one thing I found quite interesting about the book is when he talks about his time with WCW, and even how back all the way then, how inept they were. So there's a lot to cover with that. So we'll just kind of do the cliff notes. He originally gets brought there on the back of he was making a bit of a buzz for himself in the independent scene. So Foley's big thing, obviously, not only was the bumps he could take, but what was essentially, I guess, his finisher at the time, which was the elbow drop off the ring apron. So what Foley would used to do back in those days is he would lay somebody out on the outside, get up on the ring apron, do quite an impressive diving elbow on them right onto the concrete. And I think even then it was a stupid move to take, because even back then he was having problems with his hips. So I don't think that paid off in the long run.
Yeah, he was like he was like the kids that idolized Jeff Hardy before Jeff Hardy was Jeff Hardy.
Yeah. He was essentially Darby Allin idolizing Jeff, basically.
Yeah,
before they were even a thing.
I mean, you know, he talks about idolizing Superfly, people like that. But I don't know where he got the eye. Yeah, he was one of the first hardcore-y type guys, really, I suppose. He just wanted to. He never stopped being that kid impressing his mates, I think. And the fact that he was able to have a career as long as he did is pretty much a miracle. Like, really. Yeah. I took a front bump and my arm is broken, and this guy's out here just like, I think I'll do my finisher on concrete. Cool.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
cool. All right.
Majority of my matches are just going to be taking bumps. Cool.
Yeah, so that's why he got on the radar, was because of the bumps he was taking. And again, that's kind of what a lot of his career people kind of put him towards, is that he was just such a good bump taker, okay, willing to take these risks. But he was actually a tremendous wrestler given the chance. So that's why he ended up doing WCW. And he did do a lot of his first run, from what I remember, which caused him to leave for a little while. And he went back to the Indies for a bit, did a bunch of other stuff, including, I think at that time he did a horrible scaffolding match, which he writes about quite a little bit, how that was one of the few matches he was legit terrified because of how fucking dangerous they are. And lo and behold, he goes off the top of that, and I think he did suffer quite a brutal injury because of that. And then he returns to WCW and starts getting pushed pretty big. He goes straight to a feud with Sting. Then there's also, after that, he does the stuff with Vader. But what the book shows is how inept WCW were back then, because of how constantly the booker was changing. Essentially, his prominence in the show depended on who was booking at the time and whether they liked him or not, which seemed to be a common thing throughout the history of WCW.
Yeah, it's the type of thing that you will see even now in a lot of smaller promotions. In the little that I've seen, I'm very lucky in mine. So it's all about professionalism, and all I've seen is professionalism and people being listened to and, used in a relatively intelligent manner. But then you go down the road to another promotion, and it's like, I am booking my mate. I am booking people who have never set up a ring. I'm booking people who have never. Sorry, it's meowing. I'm booking people that just off the cuff. I'm booking a really expensive guy who, doesn't want to really work, but is, I'm paying the guy, he's facing a tenner, and I'm paying him 500 quid, that type of thing. And you expect once a promotion gets to a certain level, those types of things stop happening, but they appeared to have not in WCW.
No, certainly not. I mean that's kind of the credit to Foley as well. As you said there are people who could be signed to a random promotion, and it's only because the promoter's willing to fork out the cash to get them there, and they're obviously not that bothered about being there. Foley, from the way Foley writes it, especially, and obviously you got to take that maybe with a little pinch of salt. It doesn't matter what match he was working, he always seemed to want to give it his all.
Yeah, there are definitely people like that. And it can sometimes be to a detriment, especially if your all is taking the heat all the time and getting hurt all the time. Because you just, you need to give yourself longevity. And that's sometimes not easy to do when people aren't looking out for you.
Yeah.
I'll give you an exact quote from one of my coaches that he sent me earlier today. Because I one thing that's happened after my injury is I feel like one of the boys, I suppose, because everyone's reaching out. He said, "It's a dangerous game, mate. We have to look out for each other." And, perhaps at some points there were people that took advantage of him offering to do all of these bumps and offering to do all of that. And that can happen to a lot of people, and that could be pretty rough. I mean, you look, even if you work a safe style, if you work a lot and you put your all in, I mean, you look at the WWE schedule, and I mean, what was it, Brett? Did you read Brett's post about Scott Hall?
No, I don't think I did.
I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, he wrote something, pretty nice, and then said, if the schedule wasn't as brutal as it was or is, then a lot of these people would still be around, and wouldn't have had these issues. So
yeah.
So there's a case to be put in for not putting your all in all the time. Don't do a tables match on a show where you're getting paid a tenner type thing, but it did at least seem to work for him.
I think in the case of Foley, it's because I know this is a big debate. I think with Brett's comment as well, what a lot of that leads into is how wrestlers back then, obviously it was a brutal work schedule, and they should have, and even now a lot of wrestling companies should give them a lighter schedule. I think a lot of it also stems from like how a lot of them would turn to things like booze and alcohol and painkillers just to try and deal with it. Foley isn't that kind of guy, though. He was taking these horrible bumps and was essentially living with his pain. I think he writes in the book there was only one point where he desperately had to take a painkiller. Certainly at this point, and that was like the one time he'd ever done that. And this the guy who in this book, as we get to, who wrestles in barbed wire, does the thumbtacks, does the exploding ring death matches. And for all that, like he always says, like I've only ever took painkillers a handful of times. He's never been a big drinker.
He is, for I don't think anyone could dispute this. I doubt he would. His brain is wired differently.
Yeah,
like he is. He's just very good at taking punishment, I suppose.
we should say he says in the book, like people think he can't feel pain. He says, "No, I can feel pain. Everything I do sucks. Well. I just take it quite well." Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, basically, don't ever. I don't think he would ever tell anyone to do it, but never try doing what he did ever, because it's rough, and things are better these days. You don't have to. Usually, someone would get chewed out if they did that to you, and if you find a promotion that does what they did to him, don't go to that promotion. Don't take the booking. It's not worth it, and those people probably fucking suck. So,
well, I think some of it is that like he it wasn't necessarily his force, but he did find himself in these situations, and he just kind of had to do it. And as we discussed, Foley certainly wasn't the first one to pioneer weapons-based wrestling matches, but I think he was people often saw him as the Godfather because he certainly helped popularize it to a degree. So much so that like even he says like a lot of stuff that we did you shouldn't be doing. And again, going into the sequel a little bit, he has to, at that time, that's when backyard wrestling really took off, and he had to write a whole chapter explaining why people shouldn't be doing backyard wrestling, because it isn't
Yeah.
really real. Well, a lot of it wasn't really real wrestling. It was just these kids getting together with whatever weapons they could find and just beating the shit out of each other.
We showed some of the clips to the wrestler many kids idolize, Mick Foley, known as Mankind.
That looks like fun. I mean, that's no different than kids going out and playing tackle football when they really should be playing touch football. Should the kids be hitting each other with garbage cans? Probably not, but they all look like they're friends. I don't think they're doing anything out of anger. I wasn't so crazy about the light bulbs to the head. The difference is, when I jumped, the guy moved out of the way. I wasn't putting someone else's life in jeopardy. I don't even do that in our ring in front of millions of people on TV. I have too much respect for the guys I wrestle to put them in that much danger.
True, and this was also before the time where, you know, certain shots to certain places were banned, and probably things weren't gimmicked. Like, I can imagine there were places that would not use sugar glass if they were doing a glass match, or they wouldn't, you know.
Well, to that end, you'll have to tell me, because it's been a while since I read that chapter, but your book obviously covers the 2000 Street Fight at the Royal Rumble, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
I just did my matches you need to see episode. Go download it. Please listen about that match. And I alluded to, there is a very blatant switch in that match. Does he write about that in the book?
I don't recall.
Okay, so in case you're not,
I need to run and get my notes. Probably, I don't even know.
Well, in case you're not familiar, a lot of, from what I've read and what I've heard, do you know he pulls out the barbed wire 2x4?
Yeah.
Then there's that, he uses it. It's a street fight, so everything should be good. But then referee Old Hebner puts it at the Spanish announce table, and then it's switched. Apparently, it's switched to a different one, because you can tell, because the first one, it starts unraveling. The second one's completely respun.
Yeah, it's gimmicked.
So it's a gimmick. So that's where there's an obvious switch. So even Foley, despite the fact taking legit bar wire shots before, would occasionally play it safe with the things he used.
Good. Yeah, I mean, keep it safe where you can, to be honest. Like, there's nothing wrong with gimmicking something.
I mean, probably to that end, it wasn't necessarily for him. It was probably more to protect Triple H.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
true.
But still, even Foley wasn't like. I mean, that just shows professional Foley was. He was never. Whereas he's willing to take serious bumps, he was willing to always protect his opponent as well. He never took advantage of anyone. And again, I think we're quite certainly for yourself. I think a lot of people are quite looking to grow up in the age we are now, because I think wrestling was probably a much more brutal place to get into back then, and you really had to keep working at it to gain people's respect, because you would just get nothing but shit all the time. Like, people really didn't like anyone trying to train and get into the business, despite the fact you always need new stars. People would really be chewed out and tested. And tested by, I mean, you would usually get into the ring the first time, they'd break a bone or your arm deliberately to see if you would come back, you know?
Yeah, it's very strange to people on the outside to realize how much of a boys' club it is, and it still is in a lot of cases.
Yeah,
it was very. I jokingly said this as I was leaving the unit after I broke my arm, but I was jokingly saying, like, oh, I can't wait for a nurse or a doctor to ask me if it's fake. They did.
Yeah.
So they're like, isn't that fake? That's very the exact same thing that happened at the end of the first chapter when he's talking about losing his ear.
Yeah.
Exactly happened to me. They said, isn't that fake? And it's so strange. It's such a strange medium to get into, where it's like, you have to pay your dues. You have to shake everyone's hand. You have to clean up. You have to do all this. You have to respect the ring. Like, that's not like, people don't just wipe their feet because it looks good when you get in the ring. You wipe your feet because you respect it.
Yeah.
And you build up that respect to the point where people end up respecting you. And I forget where I started from here, but yeah, it's real. There's so much to it, and it's less of a boys' club now, but you still find that it very much is respect based. No matter whether that's a toxic thing or a positive thing, it will be respect based no matter where you go.
Yeah, 100%. And again, that's why he encountered so many issues in WCW. It's like, it was in like I think people can underestimate, especially before Eric Bischoff took over. Like even back then, how inept WCW was, even before Turner and Bischoff had their hands on it. It would be a constant thing of like, this guy's the booker 1 week, a few more weeks later, oh no, he's been fired. Now we've got this guy coming in. And that's kind of the uphill battle you face, because occasionally, because it would be a case, oh, this guy comes in, oh, he liked me, so he's pushing me probably in the main event scene. Then a couple of months later, oh no, this guy's been fired now. This guy's coming in, oh, he fucking hates me. Now I'm basically doing not even opening matches in some cases.
Yes. Yeah, it's
Are you going to get your notes?
No, I'm just getting my sling. I can't be bothered to get my notes. I don't even know if they're still in my car. I don't know if I've left them somewhere. I had to leave my car overnight and whatnot. It might still be in the unit, to be honest. Yeah. I mean, even now, I'd speak to some of the wrestlers there that have been to different promotions, and they talk about. I was talking to Toby Valentine, right? Toby Valentine is someone, by the way, who is going to explode and be huge, because already he's fucking huge and he's so good, and he's such a leader as well. Like the first thing he did when he met me was come up, give me a hug, introduce himself. Absolute wonderful guy, and he's fucking amazing in the ring. But he's talking about going to these other promotions, and he was like, yeah, doesn't need to, but he said, I'll go and help out in the ring just because. And then he gets the ring. There's like 15 trainees there. Not a single one of them knows what they're doing. And it's like, how have they been put on the ring if they've never been taught the ring? They're asking this guy who's come from a different promotion to be like, hey, how do we set up our ring? And he's like, fuck, I don't know. He's a farm boy. He's farm strong.
Yeah, you have told me about this fella before. No.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Great guy. Everyone at my school is so great. They really are.
They're just such nice people.
I've got to put them over while I'm injured, so that when I come back,
I think the next section I want to move on to is obviously his time in ECW and his time working in Japan. But what I want to talk about first, because it brings hope to a lot of men of the world, is when he obviously meets his wife Colette. Because Foley, I mean, I never like to use this kind of language, but Foley bags a 10.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
He bags when he used to be a former, like essentially a supermodel, and goes back to it a little in the book. So I think it brings a lot of hope to men. And I've like actually saved a bit of a section I thought was quite funny.
Go on.
So when he first meets her, now I had a little more confidence. I walked over and said, "Hello, I'm Colette Christie. How did you get my name, the Captain? How did you get the name Captain Jack? Uh-oh, an incorrect name right off the bat. For a moment, I had flashbacks to Cortland State, but then realized this was actually a good thing. She didn't know who the hell I was, so there was no way that she could be digging me for the small amount of fame. Then again, I wasn't sure she was digging me anyway. Actually, it's Cactus Jack, I corrected her. It's a wrestling name. Oh, that sounds like fun, she said, smiling. I went to wrestling matches at Madison Square Garden about 5 years ago. Have you ever wrestled there? No, I had to admit, I haven't yet. Her next question was kind of a buzzkiller. Where do you wrestle? Well, next week I'm wrestling here at the Raceway. Would you like to go? She laughed a little bit at the thought of wrestling in such a place, and I tried to cover myself by blurting out, I usually wrestle in nice places.
Yeah, he always talks in his book about how awkward he is, and it is quite lovely to not just have the wrestling there and have his love life, like but again, like we always talk about, they always lead into the wrestling, like they're getting the name wrong and whatnot. Yeah. There's the one where he has a kiss and it's just the worst kiss ever, and then instantly she's like and isn't interested anymore. But yes, he did bag a 10, and he's not an unattractive guy, but probably around that point he had probably got half of those injuries on the back of the book.
I think he'd already lost his front two teeth by that point as well, for sure. Yeah, he definitely lost some teeth, and he definitely had a few scars, for sure.
Well, Mrs. Foley's baby boy is a charmer, so he
knew how to woo the right woman, and thankfully, yes. I think what's cool about it as well, it's a testament. He is one of the few wrestlers that has had a marriage that's lasted the test of time and survived the business, because he's still married to Colette, and they've obviously had 4 children as well. So clearly found the love of his life, some might say.
Yeah.
Bye.